The United Nations has declared this decade as the Decade on Ecological Restoration. This provides a unique opportunity to tackle the challenge of restoring 2 billion hectares of degraded lands around the world. However, restoring ecosystems is not a simple task and requires a profound understanding on ecological theory and methods. In this video, we will briefly summarize main concepts and the necessary philosophy for an effective and successful implementation of restoration projects.
Definitions of restoration are varied and have evolved over time. According to the Society for Ecological Restoration, this is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So, the objective of an ecological restoration project is to recover ecosystem structure and functioning, to ensure the provisioning of ecosystem services, including a certain level of biodiversity. The process of restoration of native ecosystem would require long period of time for the ecosystem to recover its functionality, including the capacity for self-organization and ecosystem resilience to cope with disturbances. In other words, it's a step-by-step process to recover the main abiotic and biotic interaction between the ecosystem components. This will result in flow of energy, nutrient, water, and propagants across the target ecosystem and their surrounding landscape. It is also very important to consider the socio-ecological context, the human activity, and their cultural and historical dimension during the goal setting for restoration. Therefore, it's a process based on the recuperation of elements such as community composition of species and key interaction between them to facilitate the resilient ecosystem. The importance of each type of element, abiotic or biotic, in the ecosystem depend on the ecosystem type. Accordingly, restitution goals are highly dependent on ecosystem end state and context. For example, restoration can be focused on soil quality, landfall, or the river flow. But sometimes the restoration target could be species or even the recovery of some traditional land use, for example, the agricultural landscape. The implementation of ecological restoration projects require the knowledge from different disciplines. For example, ecology, functional ecology, landscape ecology, or conservation biology, but also from biological sciences, forestry or agricultural sciences, but too economy or social sciences to implement the needed framework for practitioners, governments, and local stakeholders. In this context, the community assembly theory it is very useful for implement ecological restoration goals. This theory considers two main drivers for the recruitment of species in a natural landscape: the abiotic filter, like soil characteristic, local climatic condition, or the surrounding landscape, and the biotic filters, like movement of propagules, plant-plant interaction, and animal-plant interaction. The result of all these interactions between the abiotic and biotic component driver the functioning of the ecosystem. Sometimes the recovery of the abiotic element could be more important for restoring biodiversity. Accordingly, solutions should be based on an initial diagnosis, where we evaluate functional attributes, like for example soil quality or some biodiversity index, in order to implement the best restoration project.
The ecosystem structure refers to all the components of the ecosystem, abiotic and biotic components. The biosphere is the living component of the ecosystem and includes all types of organisms, from animals to bacteria that interact with the biotic component. Therefore, ecosystem elements can be easily identified using some structural attributes like the vegetation cover, number of species, soil nutrient content, or temperature. The ecosystem structure is the present moment of all these elements within a socio-ecological framework and is the result of historical processes. Nevertheless, ecosystem structure is very dynamic and informs us about the state of the ecosystem as a short period of time, like a frame of a film. On the other hand, ecosystem function shows us the full movie, since it is the result of monitoring structural variables over time. The knowledge of the function allows us to understand the dynamics of the system and its future trajectories. For example, in Mediterranean grasslands, vegetation cover and the biodiversity index can be considered as key variables to define the restoration objectives. But if we only record this data once, we could fail in setting our restoration goals, since both variables experience marked seasonality due to the alternation of dry and wet periods. The reference ecosystem is a concept that helps to set restoration targets for restoring the functionality of the ecosystem. Reference ecosystems usually include remnant natural areas which have not been degraded. They should contain all the biotic elements and their interactions, that are drivers for maintenance of the ecological processes such as pollination, seed dispersal, and nutrient cycling. Sometimes, multiple reference ecosystems may be pieced together to form the model upon which an ecological restoration project may be based. Thus, the reference model can be used to characterize the condition and functions of the undegraded ecosystem. However, defining reference ecosystems is challenging due to different reasons, such as the lack of undisturbed ecosystems in many regions. The reference ecosystem is useful from a practical point of view, as it gives us the opportunity to outline restoration goals considering a similar context of land use, ecosystem structure, and ecological processes. For example, we can compare key attributes such as nutrient content or species richness between the reference and the target ecosystems to determine its level of degradation. This is the first step in ecological restoration, the diagnosis of your target ecosystem. This diagnosis determines not only the degree of deterioration suffered, but also the ability of the system to recover its functionality by itself. This should be a holistic diagnosis with a scientific basis, but it also integrates socioeconomic and cultural aspects. This represents a clear difference with standard vegetation practices that tries to apply a set of universal recipes whatever the level of degradation in the recovery capacity of the system. Many of these practices include tree planting or seeding to shorten the succession process and speed up the recovery of the vegetation. Nevertheless, succession implies not only restored vegetation, but also many more biotic and abiotic variables and interaction among components. Thus, restoration ecology does not have specific techniques. All possibilities are open if needed to achieve the objective. Landforming, soil addition, soil removal, tree planting, tree removal, and even fire may be used to awake ecosystem memory and trigger ecosystem recovery. The final goal of restoration is to get an ecosystem that is self-sustainable over time and is aligned with the landscape context in which it is immersed. This will ensure connectivity with other ecosystems, increasing functionality at the landscape level through the exchange of propagules, which will enhance genetic diversity.
As we previously mentioned in this video, restoration projects are very plastic, ranging in motivation and in scale, for example, from few square meters to thousands of hectares. Thus, the planning and monitoring process may vary, but there are some key common aspects that should be addressed when designing any restoration project. One of the first key points is the engagement of stakeholders. Identification and participation of relevant stakeholders will increase the likelihood of long-term success of restoration projects. However, it can be difficult to address stakeholders' concerns, especially if some of their motivations are contradictory. That is why stakeholder engagement should be addressed early in the project at the planning step. Probably the most critical point in a restoration project is to define the restoration goals as specifically as possible. Unclear or broad goals are more likely to conflict because they cannot be simultaneously maximized. Moreover, they can lead to conflicting expectations among stakeholders. Each goal should be matched with measurable objectives with a clear time frame that will allow the evaluation of the achievement of the general goal. The next step is choosing a reference ecosystem or reference model, which will represent the restoration target. For this, it is of pivotal importance to have enough information about the past, present, and anticipate future conditions at the site and similar sites in the region. Another important early step is to conduct a baseline inventory to assess current biotic and abiotic conditions in the site. This information serves as a reference point to evaluate the progress of the restoration project, as well as to know likely constraints to restoration effort due to specific conditions in the site. Once all this aspect has been addressed, then it's time to develop the design plan, which will detail guidelines, methods, and timeline to implement this project. This plan should include the restoration methods, contingency, monitoring and maintaining plans, as well as the budget and the implementation timeline. Monitoring and adaptive management plan are key to evaluate the success of restoration projects and to establish corrective action when goals are not achieved. Unfortunately, many of current restoration projects are short-lived and lack monitoring plans. Monitoring implies collecting data following a well-planned design to determine whether restoration objectives have been achieved. Monitoring data can be used to inform corrective action during the project, aiming at increasing the likelihood of success following adaptive management framework. The adaptive management cycle implies selecting monitoring parameters to assess the achievement of restoration project, monitoring these parameters at different times, analyzing data, and implementing corrective actions when needed.